Good evening. An investigation by this programme has revealed how the Church of England allowed a Kent vicar to continue working for 25 years after he confessed to sexually abusing a 14-year-old boy in the 1980s. This afternoon, Reverend David Beater from Birchington, who's now retired, was jailed for a string of sexual offences against two boys. They happened while the former vicar was in charge of St Botolph's Church in Northfleet. Our special correspondent Colin Campbell has this exclusive report.
Church of England priest David Beater confessed to child abuse in the 1980s, but was given a green light to continue in ministry.
It destroys your soul. It compounds what I've suffered.
Beater targeted this man when he was just 8 years old. Today, the retired priest was jailed for a string of sexual offences against two boys.
It's had a real detrimental effect on my life, on relationships, intimacy, the ability to open up, even to my family. It's been so painful, and I've had to tell my family, and get help, and go on tablets.
We've discovered David Beater was first convicted of child abuse 36 years ago, whilst working as the vicar of St Botolph's in Northfleet in Kent. It's a case that yet again raises very serious questions for the Church of England. In particular, how senior clergy dealt with a priest who they knew was a child abuser. David Beater confessed to sexually abusing a 14-year-old boy whilst he worked here in 1985. Despite that, he was allowed to continue working in churches for 25 years, posing a serious risk to children. In 1985, then Archdeacon Michael Turnbull, who went on to become the Bishop of Rochester, told local newspapers David Beater would stay within the care of the church, adding he will be helped and counselled so that he can begin his life again. Bishop Turnbull was himself convicted of an act of gross indecency with an adult male in 1968. Safeguarding campaigner Phil Johnson, who was abused by clergy in the Diocese of Chichester, believes Bishop Turnbull's own brush with the law possibly influenced his handling of David Beater.
In this case, Turnbull had received a conviction for gross indecency and was allowed to be rehabilitated and continue within the church. But I think that could well have clouded the judgment in a case like this. You know, in David Beater's case, you know, this was a non-consensual act and a crime against a child. You know, there is no room for rehabilitation. There is no place for somebody who's committed such an offence to be in ministry ever again.
Bishop Turnbull declined to comment until the completion of a church review into the case, saying he utterly condemns the actions of any perpetrator of abuse and will always do what he can to protect those who are vulnerable. After confessing, then resigning in 1985, within a year David Beater was invited to continue working as a curate in Bromley, later gaining work as a team vicar in the northeast of England, before returning to Kent with permission to officiate until 2010.
As we know, David Beater continued to work for over 30 years in the church, and whether he has gone on to abuse others in later years, we don't know as yet, but there needs to be a full investigation to prevent things like this happening in the future.
An internal Church of England review is underway. In a joint statement, the Diocese of Rochester and Canterbury say it's been commissioned to fully understand what has happened and the appropriateness of actions taken and to identify any previously unknown risks. Adding, for many, especially those who have experienced abuse within a church context, this situation will be deeply concerning, especially in the face of a legacy of failure in the church to ensure the safety of those we meet and engage with.
What I don't understand is why the Church of England allowed him to continue to practice religion. I just feel that he's been protected, and that really disappoints me.
It is a case that highlights further disturbing and significant failings brought to light by the bravery of abuse survivors.
Well, Colin Campbell is at Maidstone Crown Court now for us this evening. Colin, the church says an investigation is underway. What exactly does that investigation need to establish?
Charlie, the big question for the church is why did senior clergy allow David Beater to continue working in the church? He had confessed to child abuse, he had been convicted of child abuse. Now the next big question is why did they allow him to continue working in the church for so long? We understand that he was able to continue in ministry up until 2009-2010. That is despite the fact that we understand that his conviction was being held within his church record.
And you've been investigating safeguarding failings in the church for more than 10 years. How would you characterise this latest case?
I think it is fair to say that this is one of the most appalling, one of the most shocking safeguarding failings that I've come across in the last 15 years. It shows that these types of safeguarding failings are not confined to the Diocese of Chichester, the Church of England in Sussex, that they have happened elsewhere. Now, in court, it was suggested that a risk assessment was carried out on David Beater in 2001. That is 14 years after he confessed to child abuse, 14 years after senior clergy invited him back into the church knowing that he was a child abuser.
Daddy, chill!
Colin, thank you very much.